calculating productivity is, in one sense, simply an issue of output over input. But like you can see in the case of Lynx lumber, you usually, every time you're calculating productivity, trying to compare something to something else, and it's important to stay organized between the things that you're comparing. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's take a look. Lynx lumber creates pressure-treated utility poles. Oh, I haven't gotten very far, and since I know this is a productivity problem, I'm already taking notes. Output, utility poles. Now, inputs. From pine logs bought from several surrounding pine plantations. Okay. Input logs. At the Lynx lumber operation, a batch of 100 pine logs yields 85 utility poles with 5 labor hours. Labor. Just taking notes here. Is another input to utility poles required to process an entire batch. Lynx lumber is owned by Artemis Link, whose brother Devious Link is planning to marry Betty Davis, owner of Northland's Pine Plantation. Artemis expects his future sister-in-law will sell him pine logs for the same price he's paying to purchase them now from other growers. Okay. The difference in Northland Pine Plantation logs, however, is that they are considerably higher quality wood, that's nice, than the logs he purchases from his current suppliers. Okay. If Betty agrees to sell him Northland's Pine Plantation pine logs, each batch of 100 logs is expected to yield 100 utility poles, although it will take an additional 4 labor hours per batch to process the higher quality wood. All right. Lots of facts about making utility poles from pine logs. What's the first question? What is the current labor productivity at Lynx lumber? Okay, part A of this scenario is asking not about, now notice that, what's going on here? There's a comparison. There is Lynx lumber right now, and there is this potential of Lynx lumber in the future if Betty Davis cooperates and they use Northland Pine Plantation logs. Part A is only asking about right now. Okay, and it's only asking about labor productivity. I was jotting down that the inputs were logs and labor, but labor productivity is a partial measure where you just take output and you divide it by labor. You divide it by only one input, that input. Now currently the output, we need to be careful that we spot the right number. Okay, creates pressure-treated poles from pine logs at Lynx lumber's operation. Batch of 100 pine logs yields. Remember that the output is the poles, the utility poles. So currently they're getting 85 poles. What's the labor? Because that's all we're interested in calculating. That is it right there with 5 labor hours. Okay, 85 divided by 5 comes out nice and neat. 17. What's that mean? 17 utility poles per labor hour. That is the current labor productivity measure. All right, well, that was easy. What's next? What will happen to labor productivity? Okay, that's what we just calculated. At Lynx lumber, if indeed Artemis Link is able to purchase Northland's Pine Plantation lumber from Betty. Okay, so this is one thing currently, and it's asking, well, what's going to happen if the system changes Northland's Pine Plantation? Let's call that new labor productivity. We don't know that they're going to do that, but if they did, what would be the new labor productivity if they use Northland Pine Plantation lumber? All right, now, it's still output over labor. If they use Northland Pine Plantation, let's find what the output would be. Oh, right, that was down here in this paragraph, right? Each batch of 100 logs is expected to yield 100 poles. Right, that's what's so attractive about this particular supplier, is that you get 100 poles out of the batch divided by the labor, although it will take, now notice, an additional 4 hours. That means that you still have the 5 hours, that it normally takes, plus 4 more hours, okay, that's 9. So the new labor productivity would be 100 divided by 9, or I get 11.11111111. Same thing, utility poles per labor hour, but compare that to the answer that we got for part A. And remember, with productivity measures, the larger number is always better. Oh, this is kind of ironic. If they use the better quality material, the labor productivity will go down. That's actually our answer. The labor productivity will decline from 17 utility poles per labor hour down to 11.111 utility poles per labor hour. Okay, matter of fact, we can even comment on that. How about a percent difference between, now we have to be careful. A percent difference, you want to say new minus old divided by old. That's the convention for commenting on the percent difference in a transition like that. So the new is Northlands. Okay, that's the 11.111 minus 17 divided by 17. I get like negative 0.3464 some odd. Basically, negative 35%. Yes, okay. If they go with Northland's pine plantation logs, labor productivity at their operation will actually decline. That's the negative, will decline by about 35%. All right, that's part B. Part C. Suppose that Lynx Lumber currently buys batches of 100 pine logs for $40. Okay, so the logs cost $40, but Betty wants $60 for a batch of Northland pine plantation logs. Assuming that, this is interesting, now we have a labor rate here, $30 an hour. What would be the appropriate multi-factor productivity measure for production from the current logs versus with Northland pine plantation logs? Now multi-factor measure. I had jotted down at the beginning that the 2 inputs that I saw in total just in the story were labor and materials. The multi-factor measure will be output, that doesn't change, utility poles, divided by labor and materials combined. Now, the only rational way that you can combine unlike things like labor, hours, and logs is to translate them both into their financial value and add those up. That's why we were given this pricing information. Okay, so we will calculate 2 multi-factor measures because that's what it asked for, and we need to stay organized. There's current, what's currently going on, and then there's, I'm just going to write with Northland's pine plantation logs, or what I was calling new before when we were only looking at labor productivity. All right, now to calculate these, in both cases we need an output. And that didn't change. That part's easy because currently they get 85 poles out of a batch. If they were using Northland material, it would be 100 poles. That didn't change. What has changed is we now need to take into consideration both labor and the logs, but let's look at labor first. Okay, in the case of the currently what's going on, we know that for every batch they need 5 labor hours. And see now, think about it as like preparing an invoice. Now we have a rate, 5 hours at $30 an hour is a total payroll of $150 per batch. As opposed to with Northland, it's going to be more because it's 9 hours per batch, but it's times the same 30. That's what I was trying to write. So what is that? Total payroll of $270 per batch. But we don't stop there because it's a multi-factor measure. There is the business about the logs. In each case, we're buying a batch of 100 logs. Now, you might be tempted, right? Okay, 100 times, but no. Notice the pricing is by batch. The 100 is kind of a distractor. Currently, the batch costs $40. the batch of 100 that yields the 85, versus if they went with Northlands, Betty is insisting on $60 per batch. All right, really what we've done here so far is we've just organized the information that we need to calculate the multi-factor productivity measure. Because the multi-factor measure is going to be output, like in the case of currently, 85 over all the inputs. Okay, that would be $150 for labor plus $40 for materials in the case of current. So this would be what? 85 divided by 150, or divided by 190. I get 0.447. 0.447. What is that? That is the multi-factor measure, the multi-factor productivity measure for the current operation right now at Lynx Lumber. You might be looking at that and saying, what's that supposed to mean? 0.447. Well, it does have a meaning. You have to think, what's the numerator, what's the denominator? It actually means 0.447 utility poles, because that's the numerator, per dollar spent. 0.447 utility poles per dollar spent. All right, but these type of measures, multi-factor measures, they're generally the most useful when you have something to compare them to. This as compared to if they were working with the Northlands logs. All right, same calculations. 100 is the output divided by, okay, in this case there's $270 in labor plus $60 in material. What's this come out to? I get 0.303. 0.303 utility poles per dollar spent. That actually answers the question, because the only thing that Part C asked for was just what were these values, the multi-factor productivity measures in each case, and there they are. What they're indicating is, again, you're always looking for the larger number. What they're indicating is that they probably should avoid the Northland pine plantation offer or opportunity, because their current operation, as they are, is distinctly more productive. That number's higher.